To me, Thanksgiving always was like a warm blanket, soft, familiar, a bit itchy sometimes, yet in most ways comforting, in the ways I never tried to verbalize. It was the only time of year my large, disorderly family was all together, each with a different dish, a different story, a different reason to quarrel. There would be laughter and sharp joking, the smell of sweet potato and roasted turkey, and that particular nostalgia that you cannot experience unless you see your childhood friends and your cousins in the same room as your old school teachers, who somehow seem to know all your embarrassing stories. But Thanksgiving was none of that kind that I am going to tell you about. It was the year I discovered that truth, when it does come out at last, rings sometimes more loudly than laughter or insult. I guess I had better begin at the beginning, before the dinner, before the mocking, before the waiter gave me that microphone, because otherwise you will not understand why it was so painful, and why, when everybody fell quiet, it seemed to me more than any other thing in my life. I am Daniel. I was raised in the town near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, one of those towns where the leaves turn color in the fall so dramatically that the tourist will drive in just to take pictures. My parents divorced when I was 12, however. We always did Thanksgiving together, and honestly that meant a lot more to me than I thought at the time. My mother was the social coordinator, the glue, the one to make the cousins know the names of each other. My father was the silent, somewhat clumsy, yet extremely smart man who never minded that he always burnt the dinner rolls, and he would only laugh and reply, "Bread? Who needs bread when you have family?" And they all groaned, yet not one really minded. I went to college in New York, and went away to work, one of these ambitious young persons going out to make their fortune, stories you read about. Only my story had no happy ending. I was laid off at a startup just before the pandemic, and spent almost a year bouncing around, taking odd freelance jobs and feeling an existential failure I just could not shake. I have not been coming home to Thanksgiving a few years now, partly because I am ashamed and partly because I do not want to see the pity in people's eyes. The ones where when people say, "How is the job hunt going?" they really mean, "When are you going to get your act together?" This year, however, my mom insisted. She had reserved a private room at an expensive restaurant in downtown Pittsburgh, which was a very large deal in our family, as we normally did everything potluck in the messy living room of someone we barely knew. Her voice choked up. "I want them all here this year. It's important." I don't know what it was in her voice that made me say yes when all of me wanted to run and conceal. And so I rode a Greyhound with a suitcase of wrinkled clothes and a heart of dread home. Thanksgiving Day was overcast and wet. Typical Pittsburgh weather being at its most forceful, clouds that looked like filthy cotton balls, wet sidewalks glistening in the rain. The restaurant was one of these old converted warehouses, brick and Edison bulbs, the whole industrial chic. I was out of place the moment I entered, holding a thrift store button-down and my beating messenger bag. Through the glass divides, I could observe my family. There was my cousin Jen, as talkative as ever, gesturing wildly whilst she regaled the group with a story. My uncle Henry, who already had his second glass of wine. My little sister Kayla, signing into her phone with that expression only adolescents can pull off. I was standing there a second and watching. I was a stranger in my own family table. Mom noticed me and came running. She gave me a hug so tight that I thought my glasses might just slip off. She whispered, "You came." She squeezed me. "Very glad to see you, honey." That is the amazing part about moms. They know what you need even when you do not need it. I allow myself to believe that all would be well a moment. However, it was not. Not really. 20 of us were seated around a long table. Waiters poured water, and wine glasses were refilled. The initial hour was okay, even pleasant. People made nice conversations, shared appetizers, repeated the old stories about how Uncle Henry once went and locked himself in the bathroom, or how Kayla once put glitter in the gravy. I attempted to calm down, to clay again, how to be family Daniel, rather than failure the rain, and people laughed. But that piece did not hold. It began with something small, a remark of my cousin Jen, always the golden child. She was a lawyer, she had 2 children, a suburban home, and a smile that would sever glass. Leaning over, somewhat too loudly, she said, "So, Daniel, are you still between jobs?" I could feel myself getting hot in the face. Mumbled I, "Yeah, in the meantime, I have been doing a little freelance work, checking out." "Oh, that is amusing," she said with a keen glance. "I bet it is nice to not have any responsibilities." There was an interval. Uncle Henry laughed. You kids today, changes of job, absenteeism. Well, in my day, you just stayed put, regardless of how miserable you was. I made an attempt to laugh away. Well, times change I guess, said. Yet it was blood in the water. In no time everyone appeared to have an opinion. As my Aunt Linda interjected, well, you are not married and do not have kids yet. Freedom respects many things. Enjoy it whilst ye may. Sister snickered. Hey, Danny just wishes to play video games and sleep the whole day through. I could feel myself shrinking, my voice becoming smaller. I wished I could have gone into the wallpaper. Whenever I was about to speak, I was interrupted or people rolled their eyes. It was made obvious that I was the family joke, the warning, the punchline. And then career talk came about. Mark, the husband of cousin Jen, began to discuss his new promotion at the bank. Uncle Henry was proud of his retirement package. Even Kayla got in on getting an A in calculus. And they went round the table, everyone telling what they had done, their recent success, their recent accomplishment. Everyone stared expectantly when it reached me. I stuttered something about taking up some web design projects, about a probable interview in a month's time. Jen snorted and said, well, you have something to keep you busy, at least. A ripple of laughter ran along. I smiled, but it was empty in my chest. The remainder of the meal was a feint. I pricked at my meat and scarcely tasted it. Now and then somebody would put in another dig, not necessarily a malicious one, but a sharp one all the same. Someone made a joke. Remember when Daniel wanted to be an astronaut? Well, perhaps he could work at NASA. As a cleaning man. More laughter. I would have screamed, I would have gotten up and yelled that I was trying, that life had not been kind, that I had not wanted things to crumble. But I did not say a word, and I looked at the tablecloth and wished I was out of the place. Dessert came. Pumpkin pie, pecan tarts, coffee. They started discussing the old times, school plays, childhood pranks, family vacations. I was safe, a while. I might melt into the background and nod and laugh at the proper moments. However, at the end of the table, there emerged the restaurant manager holding a wireless microphone. His throat cleared. Here on Thanksgiving, we have a sort of a tradition, he declared. We are offering one guest per party to provide a memory or a message of thanks to everyone. Mama, bless her heart, chimed in at once. Daniel must do it. It was assented to, half in mockery, half in truth. Yea, what say ye, Daniel? Jen shouted, her voice somewhat too loud. Give the man a chance to shine. The waiter gave me the mic with a polite smile on his face. I stood still for a moment. I could sense 20 pairs of eyes stare at me. Family, strangers, the staff included. I could not stop shaking. I considered having a pass, making a joke and sitting down again, but then I saw my mum, with her eyes full of hope, and something in me arose. I was white-knuckled on the microphone. The room fell still, so still that I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I drew a long breath. I shall never forget the way it made me feel, the way time had sort of stood still, the way it had grown quiet. My family was looking at me expecting another punchline, and I wasn't going to give it to them. Not this time. Yes. My voice caught in my throat and I swallowed. I began, my voice low, however firm. I know I am not where I believed I would be. I can see you guys make jokes about me, about my jobless situation, about how I have not yet settled and found my bearing. Some of the people fidgeted. Jen lost her smirk. I understand. It is funny to mock the one that is struggling. It increases your feeling of being safe, makes you feel that it could not happen to you. However, the reality is that life does not always go as you plan. At times things just break apart. Occasionally you lose your direction. It never gets easier. Sometimes you have to begin again, and again. I looked at my mother. She nodded her head at me, very tiny, and her eyes filled with tears. Much of this year I have felt a failure, I went on, as though I were not belonging, as though I were not good enough, not for this family, not for anybody. But what I came to know is that everyone has got something to hide. Nobody wants to be the joke, the punchline. And perhaps whether we were just a little kinder to one another, a little more honest, we should all be a little less alone. There was a silence in the room. Even the employees were no longer moving. I got another breath, a steadier one. I am thankful I have a family, I said brokenly. Even when you mock at me, even when it hurts. because it makes me know I am still alive. I am still attempting. I am still loved, although it is not always easy to notice. I stared Jen full in the face. And what is more, I am proud of myself. I am proud of myself for any day that I wake up and carry on even when I cannot. And I hope someday you will be able to be proud of me too. It put the microphone aside. One moment, no one stirred. No one uttered a thing. Then Mother got up and began to applaud. Gradually others took it up. My sister, my uncle, even Jen, though her eyes were glassy. The silence was broken, not laughingly, not joking, but something more tender, understanding, and perhaps even respect. And it was the first time in a long time when I felt I belonged. A long, long moment that applause haunted the air like an echo, thrilled in my chest, my hands, my eyes. I was standing there a bit stunned, half cringing away, half trying to drink in the feeling as long as I could. It was not thunderous, not a standing ovation, not the yell of an arena. Yet it was actual. It was my family, and they gave me something I had not felt in years. Acceptance. I sank back in my chair, flushed to the ears, blotting back the start of a tear. My mum across the table took my hand and shook it so hard I nearly flinched. "Beautiful baby," she whispered. One of the noisiest, my Uncle Henry, sat down and whispered in my ear. "You show some fight, kid. It takes a real man," he says, "to get up in front of us that way." I simply nodded, unable to trust myself to speak. Even Jen, with her perfect life and her smooth smile, was apparently taken aback. She was more than usually silent, nibbling at her pie, her jaw set with the restraint of something which she could not venture to say. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was another thing. The talk was taken up again, more quietly, more tentatively. No one cracked a joke on me. No one laughed at me talking. They questioned me instead. Not the nice fake questions, but the real ones. Mark, the husband of my cousin, leaned over. "What sort of freelance work are you doing so? I have a friend that requires assistance with his site. I suppose I might present you." "Yea, that I would, thanks." It was as though a change had come. A little one perhaps, but an actual one. It was the first time in a long time that I did not feel like the family disappointment. It made me feel like a person who was important, a man with a voice. However, the story does not end there. Since I wish I could say that everything was different after that, that my family finally recognized me as the person I was, that all my troubles were gone, that my life had changed in a blink of a second, it did not. The real life is not so. It is not that people change overnight. Pain does not simply disappear. The fact is that Thanksgiving was an ending and a beginning. It took me directly against things I had been avoiding seeing. Not only the disappointment of my family, but my disappointment. It brought home to me how I needed their approval, although I was saying I did not care. It caused me to ask myself whom I was living and why. Now, just after dessert, when folks were beginning to collect their coats and bid their goodbye, Jen called me aside in the hall. We simply stood there a moment, the distant echoes of laughter and clinking glasses coming in upon us out of the dining room. It was the first time in years that she looked at me really, and she said with a low voice, hardly more than a whisper, "I am sorry. We had no business to laugh at you in that way. I guess I was simply jealous. I guess." I gaped at her in surprise. "Jealous? Of what?" She shook her shoulders and looked away. "Of your free will. I bet it doesn't feel like that to you, but occasionally I glance at my life, at all the commitments made, the children, the work, the mortgage, and I think, what would it be like to simply begin again, not to have it all figured out?" She gave a little bitter laugh. "I am always scared, Daniel. I'm afraid of making a mess, and there will not be anyone to grab me." We were both quiet a moment. There was less distance between us. "Not freedom," I said. "It's just life. Life organized and disorderly, but thanks." She nodded and bit her lip. "Anyway, I simply preferred that you should know." And that was all. We never embraced, we never cried, but somehow it changed. Someone broke through the armor. Some insight into the actual individuals behind the masks we presented at family dinners. That night I went out of the restaurant feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. The urban air was raw and crisp, and full of the odor of damp pavement and automobile fumes. I went home to my mom, shoving my hands in my pockets and my brain spinning. I ran the dinner, the speech, the expressions of all the people again. A part of me questioned whether I would regret being so open. Deep down, I knew I never would. When I got home, Mom was already home, throwing off her heels in the hall. She smiled at me, gently weary. "You were terrific this evening, Daniel." I shrugged and did not know how to accept the compliment. I simply could not stand it anymore. She nodded. "I know. I am sorry, hon. Family sucks." I saw her right. I noticed for the first time how much she was tired. The lines round her eyes, the slump of her shoulders. She always attempted to keep us stuck together. Always attempted to make everything all right. Perhaps she was tired as well as I. I surprised myself by saying, as I went, "Thanks for making me come." She smiled. "Of course. You're supposed to be here, Daniel, whatever the cost." I gave her a hug and squeezed her a moment or two longer than is my custom. I lay awake that night in my old childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling. My thoughts would not leave the dinner, would not leave Jen, and her apology, and my speech, and the applause. I was bruised and scoured and bare, like a sore that may be at last closed. I wondered how many times I allowed fear to control my life. Fear of failure, fear of not wanting to disappoint my family, fear of never measuring to their expectations. I wondered how often I had kept quiet, let the jest pass, made believe I did not mind. Yet I did care. I had always had. Perhaps the most difficult thing was to accept that I wanted to be noticed, to be listened to. I picked up my phone, flicking through the old pictures. Thanksgiving past, family vacations, birthdays. I dug out one old one. Me and Jen, both children, pumpkin pie all over our faces and smiling like fools. I looked at it a long time and questioned how things came to be so complex. I got up early the following morning, when the house was still asleep. I went padding downstairs and made coffee, strong, sweet, as Mom liked it. A few minutes later, she entered, in her old Steelers sweatshirt and fuzzy slippers. "What? Couldn't sleep?" she inquired. I dismissed my head. Too many things in my mind. She smiled at me, knowingly. "It can happen to anybody." We were quiet a moment or two, drinking coffee, hearing the house creak and settle. It was pleasant, relaxed. After a moment she said, "What will you do now?" I shrugged. "I am not sure. Guess I will just keep trying. Perhaps you should accept Mark on that offer." She nodded. "It is all that any of us can do." The remaining weekend blurred by. Family calls, leftovers, embarrassing conversation. There was a slight change in the way people behaved with me, more cautiously. Some just apologized. The rest of them simply showed me small mercies. They refilled my coffee, they smiled honestly, they asked me about my work without being sarcastic. It was not ideal. Still, it was good. On Sunday, as I took the bus back to New York, my mother gave me a big hug. "So call me when you arrive, all right?" "I will." She gave me a kiss on the cheek. "I am proud of you, Daniel." The words sounded in my ears back to the city. In my own little crammed, unpacked box and half-finished projects-filled apartment, I felt different. Not peace in the precise sense. Not closure. But a feeling that I might take a bit easier breath. That perhaps, things would be all right. I phoned Mark and did some web work for his friend. It was not glamorous, but at least it was something. One thing then led to another, and gradually I began to rebuild. Brick by brick, my self-esteem improved. I erred. I failed. I made a second effort. I communicated with my family more than usual. Phones calls, text messages, even some Zoom dinners. The jokes did not vanish in one night, but they transformed. They were more soft, more kind. We began to go deeper than the superficial news. I grew closer to Jen as we shared tales of the mayhem of being adults, how we both had failed in certain aspects, and what we were afraid of that no one knew. As the years passed, the story of that Thanksgiving disappeared, faded into merely another memory, another story to be told and retold round the family reunion. But to me it was something more. It was my day of discovering my voice. The day when I understood that I did not have to be the joke any longer. That was the day I also came to know that sometimes the things which hurt us the most are the things which liberate us. After Thanksgiving that year, something in me changed, a stuck door that has been forced open. Weeks later I would find myself reliving the entire night, how my voice shook at first, the heat of shame, the sudden silence of a room accustomed to my family noise, and then that applause. Not much, but earth-shattering, loosening a truth I had not dared to believe in years. However, recovery is not a linear process, and my life did not immediately turn into Technicolor as soon as I established borders with my family. In fact, it made me examine the bruises that I had been living with quite a long time. I suppose I had better backtrack a little, present to you the whole scene, such as only emerges late at night, or at the bottom of the bottle, when truth finally gets the best of pride. I have always been the good kid. Quiet, a bit clumsy, most content with a book and a notebook rather than backyard football or science fairs. Jen, though, was a cutie. Straight A student, captain of all, her name on all the honor rolls and trophy cases. I learned to deal with the comparison even when I was a child. Adults would mess my hair and tell me, "Don't worry, Daniel, not all the people can be a superstar like Jen." They believed it to be soothing. It was like a burden. Success, possibly even more than love, was rewarded in our family. No one was cruel, really, it was merely careless. Mom would be happy if I received a B+, but a cake would appear if Jen received an A+. When I got a painting out of an art class, it was put on the fridge. When Jen won a medal, it was put in a glass case. And when my parents became divorced, all the strength was aimed on keeping the things functioning. No discussion of feelings or pain. I learned at a young age how to bottleneck, so as to act as though nothing happened to me. It could be that when I myself failed, really failed, the first time in my adult life, it seemed that the world looked on, so that like the entire family, even when I was states away, they could see me floundering. Perhaps that is why those Thanksgiving jokes were so rotten. They reinforced all that I had ever dreaded was true. The months following Thanksgiving, my freelance business improved, gradually. I began to wake up earlier than noon, establishing a small routine of mine. I would go through emails, prospect new clients, and watch YouTube videos on things I never took the time to learn in college: SEO, design, and even some coding. At times I thought maybe my family pictured me because I sleep until noon, survive on takeout and Netflix, and it was pleasant to be able to make them wrong, although they never saw it. Quietly, Mom would call every Sunday. We'd discuss her book club, the neighbors, Kayla and her newest drama at school. She would always finish the phone conversation with, "How are you really, honey?" And I would attempt, big time, to tell the truth. Jen phoned through as well. Her check-ins were kind of clumsy at first, awkward, even clinical, as though she were going through a list. How work? Have you ate? Do you go outdoors? However, in the course of time it mellowed. We told true tales. She admitted that she occasionally jealous my reset button. I explained to her how freelancing can be lonely. One night we were tipsy together on the phone. She in her kitchen, I on my futon, she with a glass of Chardonnay, and I with a cheap beer. She confessed that she occasionally considered leaving her job and going to Colorado to instruct yoga, just to experience what it is to fail. I almost choked with laughing. She laughed as well, and in a moment we were no longer the golden child and the disappointment. We were two weary adults, both of us wanting life to have an instruction manual. The Christmas came quickly. Mom demanded that we come home that year. I feared it and desired it simultaneously. A part of me feared it would all spring back to be as it was, old jests, old hurts. A part of me wished it would be otherwise. By the time I arrived at home, the house was already crowded. Kayla and her friends blasting music, Uncle Henry yelling at the television, Jen running after her children up the stairs. It was a pine-scented, cinnamon-scented, sugar cookie smell. It was the first time I was not asked a joke about jobs or girlfriends. Jen gave me a hug at the door and kept me a moment longer than I thought she would. "Well, I am glad you are here, Dan," she said, real and simple. The night dragged out. Games, stories, the same casserole nobody ever says he likes. When we sat down to dinner, I braced myself. Mom distributed small pieces of paper and said, "Write on one thing you are thankful for, and one thing you want to see next year." We read them in turn aloud. By the time it came to my turn, my hands were a little shaky, but not my voice. I may as well have said, "I am glad I can still be a part of this table," and I looked at both Mom and Jen. "And I hope next year I will be courageous enough to do new things, even though I am afraid." Silence. And then applause. Earnest, genuine, and free all idea of ridicule. I shook a glance at Jen, and she mouthed, "Me too." It was not a miracle. It was not ideal. Still, it was something. Facing myself. This was the Christmas after which I began therapy. I'd been telling myself years that I didn't need it, couldn't spare the money, could not find the time, did not want to go poking around in the old hurt. but I saw that it was not only my voice in my head that told me I was never enough, or never successful, or unlovable. It was all those off-the-cuff remarks, all those comparisons in childhood, all those jokes at my cost. Months later, I could proudly say out loud that I was proud of myself, that I was worthy of compassion even on my part. I began to write again, page after page of anger, regrets, hope, and suppressed dreams. I bought shame books, resilience podcasts. I became a member of an online support group, and gradually I came into myself. I have trained myself to forgive my family not because they have requested or not because they have always been worthy of it, but because I had to move on. I developed forgiveness towards myself because I was not the person that everybody thought I was. I allowed myself the desire to have more, to make another attempt, to fail, and to continue. One spring I received a call. Jen. She was hysterical, out of breath. "Are you able to talk?" "Sure," I said, and threw down everything. She had lost her job, tremendous downsizing at the law firm. Even the golden child had not seen that one coming. It was pitiful, she thought as she sank. "Dan, I am drowning. I am afraid always." How did you manage when it all went wrong?" I was sitting quietly and her question weighed. But I had known the answer. Muttered, "One day at a time. You allow yourself to feel sad, and then you move on and attempt again, and you fall on your family, even though it is tough." It was my turn to be comforting. It was the first time that Jen had opened up to me, not the star student, not the perfect mom, but my sister, who was frightened and needed assistance. We began calling each other once a week, rooting each other on in resumes and interviews and midnight panics. We became closer than ever before. The space between us faded away, and it was substituted with a sort of affection that is born only out of shared disappointment. That was Thanksgiving almost 3 years ago. I am yet to be the success story that my family thought I would be. But now my life is my own, ugly, uncertain, but true. I had established a small business that is consistent to the extent I do not wince when asked what my line of work is. Jen finally managed to find a new job, less worthy, more adjustable, and, she confesses, much happier. Kayla is in college now and desiring to talk to get some advice she would have never taken at her younger age. Mom is a retiree, a traveler, a woman who has decided to place herself first. We still have holiday get-together. The jokes still come, but they are cushioned. The lost and the found, the broken and the healing. There's room at the table. And each Thanksgiving, when the waiter gives the mic to our table, everyone looks at me, not to laugh, but to hear what I have to say. I narrate, I give a memory. I remind them, and myself, that they will not belong by being perfect. It is the result of courage to display your scars. And that was my story. In case you liked it, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, where I post more real-life stories like this one.